steel stand. I was welding steel stands to support the forms. I'd done a residency in Levelland, Texas, and one of my friends from Texas Tech taught me how to weld. And it was a real fitting time because I'd already started puncturing the clay pieces with steel shards. So it was a natural progression to then start welding steel stands to support them. So at the bottom of the war pot is a drill bit turned upward so it looks like a flower, and then there's a steel cutout plate on the floor that was referencing an oil spill. And then the angel piece on the right is more of the angels weeping.
And what is the solo eye here? Because I've just noticed this in relation to your more recent work.
It's the all-seeing eye.
The all-seeing eye?
So, yeah, it's the all-seeing eye.
Does it come from the dollar bill, or where does it come from?
From the idea of God.
Okay.
And then as the narrative continued and I was dealing with trauma in my personal life, I started doing self-portrait pots that told about all the trauma that I was dealing with. I felt like at one point my life was like a soap opera. So I started getting that out on my vessels. And the first show I had where I had all these self-portrait pots, I really felt pretty exposed and vulnerable and naked, and actually had naked images of my body on these pots. And when we were getting ready for the opening reception, I thought, what are you thinking, that people are going to want to buy pots with your picture on them and hear your sad stories? And
so how did the show do?
It did great, because what I figured out is that
everybody wants a soap
we all,
opera.
as human beings, we all have similar
universal
experiences.
problems. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So people could relate to them and bought them. But that.
And what about the flowers?
Behind the flowers are the little demon heads peeping out.
Okay. Well, I think again, it's interesting the way you've related the imagery that you've painted on the pot with the actual sculptural flowers that you've made sprouting from it. Oh, now you have an interesting story to tell about this one, correct?
Twin sisters of different colors lead parallel lives of struggle, success, and love. This was a girlfriend of mine from Texas Tech that I kept in touch with after we finished college, and it seemed like every time we talked on the phone we were dealing with the same kind of issues. She was in New York and I was in Texas, but still, it's just.
And as this is the two of you on the vessel?
That's the two of us, mm-hmm. Cheryl and me, and then this piece was actually one of the last pieces, the last series I did in Houston before I moved here, and I was still working through some personal issues, and the image on the right is me perceiving myself in old age. This is dialogue with Dr. G, or bartering for angels. So that piece I told you about that the collector broke, he called me on the phone acting like he wanted to buy some more work, and when I called him back, he started yelling at me about his piece getting broken, and it was kind of a traumatic conversation. So when I hung up the phone, I got out my sketchbook and immortalized him as a demon, and me as a little bald-headed innocent angel.
You sure you didn't want a job in TV animation doing cartoon imagery or something? And what's on the other side?
The other side has the image of the wall piece that I pointed out earlier with the dual angels on it. Was the piece that he had
got broken.
That got broken.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a slide of it, so I projected it on the pot, and I ended up making him another piece and selling it to him at a discounted price after the gallery owner said she didn't want to deal with him for me to just do whatever I wanted to.
Oh wow.
Then when I'd been teaching part-time in Houston for 3 years, and realized I really liked teaching college, and by chance I found out that there was a full-time position opening at San Antonio College.
So that's what brought you to San Antonio?
When I decided I wanted to teach college, I came to San Antonio to visit some friends, and called Jim Broderick, who was my department chair at Texas Tech, who then was the department chair at University of Texas San Antonio, and he referred me to some other places and told me where I could go and apply for jobs. So I went and applied for a part-time job at San Antonio College and was offered a part-time job, but I was offered a better part-time job in Houston at that point. So I stayed in Houston and taught for 3 years, and then I heard through an acquaintance that there was a full-time position open at San Antonio College, so I came back and applied for that and got the job.
And were these made before or after?
No, these were made after I got to San Antonio. After doing, I did those narrative pots, those self-portrait vessels for about 5 years and had several shows. So pretty much everybody in Houston knew all my personal information and all my sad stories.
It's almost as good as Facebook for that, huh?
So when I got to San Antonio, it's like I could go out places and nobody knew me. I could go to restaurants and I didn't see anybody I knew.
Reinvent yourself.
And nobody knew all my
You could reinvent Susan
personal
Budge.
sad stories. So I felt very,
And so
I became very introverted
So that was
and
one reason
quiet.
you really shifted what your work was about then, and stylistically and all of that. So why temples?
A spiritual place.
Did you feel that way about San Antonio when you got here? That it was
I
a
felt
spiritual
very
place?
grounded once I got here. I had a real sense of stability that I hadn't had before.
Why do you think that is?
Having a full-time job
Right.
with a regular income where you don't have to worry about how you're going to pay your rent.
And a city with a better cost of living for the creative class?
Oh, yeah. I lived in such a dangerous neighborhood in Houston when I was trying to get my career going as an artist that, you know, there were armed guards at the grocery store, and I'd make my mom turn her rings before we'd go in, and the produce was terrible, you know, and then I moved here and got to live in a house in Alamo Heights and went to Gucci B for the first time to go shopping, and we went through the produce department, and I just couldn't believe what a beautiful store it was. And at the checkout stand, Mother said, "Look, just think, honey, you're going to get to shop here every week." And I started crying. I was like, I know, and they have such fresh produce. And the lady at the checkout stand looked at us like, what rock did these people come out from under? So yeah, I had a real sense of stability when I got here.
Okay, how about the shapes for these temple structures? Just spontaneously evolved as you were playing with clay? Okay.
And then I put things on the inside. So when the first show that I had of these in Houston, I would always do talks for a group called Looking at Art, where I would talk for every show that I had to a group of people. And one of the things that they pointed out when I talked about this work was that it was like I had turned my vessels inside out. So all the personal information was inside the forms, and there were little windows where if you would get down low enough and look in the windows, you could see forms on the inside that had more narrative to them.
Oh, so you painted the inside? Wow.
And put forms on the inside, not imagery, but forms.
Okay. These are some more examples.
And then I decided to go to graduate school again. I only had an MA, not an MFA, from University of Houston Clear Lake, and I was encouraged to get my MFA by my colleagues, and as I was approaching tenure, and I also found that if I would accumulate more graduate hours, I would jump up the pay scale faster. And Jim Broderick was the department chair at UTSA.
UTSA.
Ken Little, whose work I love and was out there, and Steve Reynolds, who I already knew and respected his work, was teaching there. And then Fran Colpitt was teaching art criticism. And I didn't know her, but I respected her and wanted to develop my writing skills more. So I went ahead and started graduate school out there. I called Jim. Jim felt like an old friend, you know, from Texas Tech. I'd held his daughters when they were babies and stuff. So I called Jim and said, I want to come to graduate school, but I want to go part-time because I'm full-time tenure track at SAC. And he said, sorry, all of our graduate students are full-time. I said, come on, Jim, I could go part-time at UT in Austin. He said, fine, go to UT in Austin.
Oh, my goodness. So what
So,
happened?
so I went full-time to graduate school, and while I was teaching full-time at SAC and head of the exhibitions program on tenure track.
Did you get any sleep?
No, very,
No.
very little. But
Okay.
one of the things that was really nice for me in graduate school was I'd always been strongly influenced by Brancusi, but I always
Oh, yes,
tried
we
to
see the
I tried
homage
to
to Brancusi in
minimize.
there. Yes.
I tried not to let the influence show, and I found out in graduate school that it was all right to let your influences show. So I was encouraged by the faculty at UTSA to make even bigger forms, and
And
to
of course, in the image on the left of the screen there, in the furthest back, you're referencing Brancusi's Endless Column.
from flower pot forms. So
Ah.
it's also rooted in ceramics.
Great, great. Anything else in there you want to mention before we go on?
No, we keep going.
Okay. These little nests.
These little nests. This is a little bit out of order, but it's okay. I don't know why I started making the nests and the eggs. It was just something I was compelled to do. This came shortly after my MFA show from UTSA. If you go on to the next slide, that's my MFA show at Blue
Okay,
Star.
we'll back up in a second then.
At the satellite space. And so I was continuing the forms where I was influenced by Brancusi, but I was also, go on to the next one, please, had started doing these ceramic hard hats as a tribute to my grandfather, who was in the oil industry and worked first as a roughneck and then I think a tool pusher and then a rig foreman. I'm not sure what the order was exactly, but I had his old hard hat and decided to use it as a mold and then fire it and glaze it. The first one had to be pink. And then after I made the pink one, I thought the form was interesting. It was like a form that would come out of a Jell-O mold. And it was a nice size form for me to test glazes on. I wanted to explore a variety of glazes that I hadn't used before, and a lot of times in ceramics we'll do little bitty test tiles, and you can't really get a sense of how the glaze is going to move over a form on a flat little tile, but on these rounded forms I could see how the glaze was going to break over the edges and everything. So I started making more of them to use as my test tiles. But then once I started hanging them on the wall, they seemed to reference pregnant, protruding bellies. So I like that figurative reference also.
And when you showed the work in Houston, it took on a new life,
When I
didn't it?
showed this show that from the slide on the left was opened on September 15th of 2001, 4 days after 9/11. We discussed postponing the show because everybody was in such a state of shock, and when we weren't sure that it was appropriate, and the I forgot what the title for the show was, but it was something real positive and uplifting, which also seemed inappropriate at such a somber time. But we decided to go ahead. We decided that people would probably need to get away from their television sets and get out and do something else. So we went ahead and stayed with our scheduled opening, and I had the 40 ceramic hard hats as titled Tribute, as a tribute to my grandfather. But when people came in the gallery 4 days after 9/11, and all the people were working in the pits cleaning up the mess from the bombing that we suffered, they thought that I had made this as a tribute to the workers in the pit.
To the firemen. And what about the companion slide there? We see the image on the right.
That one is a goddess form that was from my MFA show from UTSA. That was an important piece to me, though, because another thing that happens in ceramics is sometimes you don't like the results you get when you open the kiln door. A glaze firing doesn't always yield the positive result that you hope for. So I had glaze fired the goddess piece once and opened the kiln door and went, no, this is horrible. This does not work with this form, and reglazed it and fired it again and opened the kiln door the second time and hated it, and it didn't work. So as a last resort, I went and bought about, I don't know, $300 worth of gold luster, and gold luster comes in little bitty vials about this big and no bigger around than a dime. So you have to use a little bitty brush, and that piece is like 6 feet tall. So I had used all these vials of this gold luster that you have to paint on top of a glaze, and you can't touch it. So I had to position it right outside, right on the edge of the kiln, so that I could wiggle it into place by those little points.
So
when it
you
was
paint
ready
it
to
with
fire.
the gold luster and then it's fired?
And then you have to fire it again. Well, I'd never fired gold luster in a gas kiln either. And gold luster is very temperamental, like we were taught that you can't even smoke in the studio when you're working with the luster, because if it gets contaminated, it turns blue. So and then it goes to a really low temperature because the powdered metal is actually suspended in the oil. So if you fire it too high, you burn away the gold, and so
This is where your early training in geology could come in handy.
it was scary to close the kiln door and hope that I didn't burn up $300 worth of luster, but it turned out. So
And 3 is a charm?
and then the third, yes, the last firing, I was pleased when I opened the kiln. The piece on the left is Eros. One of my best collectors is an endocrinologist in Houston. And when he saw this piece, he said, "You know what this looks like, don't you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "It looks like the female reproductive system." So he bought this piece, and then the one on the right is Muse. Those are both about 4.5 to 5 feet tall.
And is there a reason why the reference to the female reproductive system becomes important
Significant.
at
The
this
same
time
thing
in
is
your life?
it was around that same time period that I started doing the nests with the eggs, and I was I think I was starting menopause about that time, and had pretty much given up on ever having children because my collector, who is an endocrinologist, when I moved to San Antonio, I was 35, and I said, "Alton, should I be freezing my eggs in case I ever have the chance?" And he said, "No, they're too old already. It's too late." So
And then
what happened? I unexpectedly got pregnant during menopause and had my baby.
yes, that's right. Here's to William. Okay, so that really changed your working schedule, didn't it?
Changed everything. It changed everything so dramatically and so drastically, and so it was such a great experience to have my son, which then influenced my work. I'd always liked working on a large scale, and I didn't think that I was good at working on a small scale. I didn't think I had a good sense of proportion on a small scale. But then you have a baby and everything is miniature. So I started making small pieces.
But then you also veered into public art at this point.
But then I got a commission, and I actually was hired for the commission for Brackenridge Park before I got pregnant, because I was hired for the commission in Brackenridge Park in 1999. We just didn't execute the final work until I think the opening in the park, I think, was 2005. So I was still in design development when I had William, and then I executed the work and then was waiting for the time to install it. And William was, I think, probably about 2 when we were getting ready to start the installation. But they had the park all roped off. I couldn't see where they were on the schedule, and so I used to take William on the train ride so I could get into the park and see how they were coming with the construction.
Okay, good. I have a couple questions for you about this work. First, tell us about the title.
The work for the park had to have a direct reference to nature that the public could understand and relate to. So the architect still wanted to have work that was in my style, but have these meanings. So quercus is the name of this piece, and quercus is the Latin for oak, and the form is in the shape of a live oak leaf, and then the pass-through in the middle is in the shape of an acorn.
Now, venturing into public art, did this really change your working method, at least on this project?
It was really great timing when I was asked to apply for this commission. I had just gotten back from a trip to Europe where I'd gone to a clay conference in Amsterdam, and the work that I was most interested in at the conference that I saw was public art. And then I went on and went to Berlin and started looking at all the gardens. So it was while I was on the trip to Europe that my mom called and said that Felix had called her and asked if I would be interested in submitting a proposal for this park, because I'd left her number as a forwarding number while I was out of the country. And she told him when I would be back, and he said, "Oh, she won't have time. She won't have enough time because it's you have to do the proposal within a few days of when I got back from the trip." But I was so excited about the idea of it, and I felt like I'd already been preparing for it in the work that I was looking at while I was in Europe. So as soon as I got back, I went to the park and shot slides of different elements that I thought were interesting in the park and things that I thought were problems in the park, and then combined that with slides of my work for my presentation, and was hired for the job.
And then the whole working process of doing a public artwork was very different from working independently, right?
Right, because you have to have exact drawings that you can work from, and you have to make work that looks exactly like the drawings that are approved. So I was just telling my students about this today too, because we were talking about shrinkage rates, and you have to calculate for the shrinkage rate of clay. It shrinks about 10 to 15%, which is about an inch a foot. Well, I had the architects blow up my drawings for me to work on in the studio so that I could make the pieces exactly like my drawings, but I forgot to tell them to enlarge them 10 to 15% for the shrinkage. So the first piece I made for Brackenridge Park, when I opened the kiln door, I went, "Oh no, it's 4 inches shorter than it's supposed to be," because I didn't calculate for the shrinkage.
So you had to do
so
it
I
a
made
second
it over.
time?
Yeah.
But this time, the second time was the charm, not the third time.
It was okay.
And then this is the other piece in the park.
This is Anaqua. We did a lot of research on the history of the park, and the Anaqua seed was important to the native settlers that were in the area. So this was abstraction of a bird holding the Anaqua seed in its beak.
Very nice. Okay, now we're back in the studio, and you're starting to work on a smaller scale, as you were referring to. And tell us about these inset eyes that start to appear in the work.
So I had to get back in the studio and get to work, and I had this little infant. So I got my baby holder and put my baby in the baby holder and put him on a work table in the studio and got back to work. And every time I'd look over at my little baby, he's fixed on me, watching everything I do. And I think, oh, this little person's going to be watching me his whole life. I've got to behave myself and set a good example. So it's still the idea of, and then I think, do we behave differently when we know we're being watched? Yeah, I think we do. And it's having a living, breathing human being that you love watching you, I think, has more of an impact than the abstract idea of God.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, the eye has two meanings for you. The all-seeing that you referred to earlier, and the presence of your son, who is now literally in your sculpture.
Mm-hmm. And then the piece on the left is the mouth of truth, and that's referencing the mouth of truth in Rome.
You want to explain that?
There's a mouth of truth. It's a big sculptural disc with a face in it and an opening that's the same shape as the opening in my sculpture, and the idea was that if you put your hand in the mouth of truth and don't tell the truth, that it'll bite your hand off. The piece on the left is toy. The piece on the right is blue spider. Another thing that happened after having William was I tried to conquer some of my fears. So I had a real fear of snakes and insects and spiders and things. And the wife of my gallerist in Houston had pet snakes and spiders. So when we went to visit them, I decided that I would hold the snake so that William wouldn't be afraid to hold a snake too. So I held the python, he held the milk snake, and that was fine. But then when she got out the tarantulas, I just couldn't hold the tarantula. Then the piece on the left, the toy, that red tongue thing comes out, and it's a rattle.
Ah, so you're really thinking about your son's world more at this point, and some of those ideas enter into your sculpture.
Also, when I was doing the research for the park, one of the artists whose work I really liked was Gaudi,
Mm-hmm.
and I started encrusting pieces with the glass beads and grouting around them, and then it was after I started doing those pieces that a collector sent me books on Nikki de Saint Phalle,
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
and so I was also making these pieces that had cherries on the surface. It's real obsessive activity, gluing on all these glass beads and making these cherry halves to go on these ceramic objects. And
You were having a good time doing it.
I
though.
didn't know what is wrong with me that I'm doing this obsessive activity. And then I realized it was when William was a toddler, and you have to watch out what you're feeding a small child. Like you have to cut their grapes in half so they don't choke.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's where that obsessive activity came from. The I can't see the title. Is that Queen?
Bluebird and Queen.
Those were from the
Bluebird and Queen.
Those were from the I Spy show, the first I Spy show that I had in Houston, which most of the pieces in the show had eyes peering out from them, and a lot of them were really playful pieces. The Queen, I really thought was like a chess piece.
Yes. And again, the Gaudi-inspired surface.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And the bird sort of goes back to Brancusi in some ways.
Yes.
Yeah. Is this from the same show?
This is from Myth, Magic, and Mystery series. This was at Galleria Ortiz.
Oh, that's right. This is right here in San
2008.
Antonio.
So
Mhm.
this show actually followed the show at the Botanical Gardens. So
Which
I
we'll see in
felt
a
like I
minute.
had several different directions going in my work at this point. I had the pieces that were encrusted with the beads, and then the forms that were still more of a reference from Brancusi, and then the eyes, and then the more abstract, non-objective forms.
And tell us about your title, Myth, Magic, and Mystery.
Well, these forms that were like goddesses, I would make the forms and then try to figure out what the titles were. So I